Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna. You're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. The US military says one of its refueling aircraft has crashed in western Iraq. The United States has temporarily allowed the purchase of Russian oil already at sea. And EU leaders are invited to the Brussels summit on the 19th and 20th of March to tackle global challenges. The United States military says one of its refueling aircraft has gone down in western Iraq during ongoing operations in the region. It comes in the middle of the ongoing war in Iran, and strikes both in Israel and the US have exchanged in the Middle East. 4 confirmed dead in US military refueling plane crash in Iraq, according to US Central Command.
The United States has confirmed that a military refueling aircraft has crashed in western Iraq during operations linked to the war against Iran. US Central Command says the aircraft was a Boeing KC-135 Stratotanker, a key refueling plane used to supply fuel to fighter jets and bombers during long-range combat missions. Officials say the crash occurred in what the military described as friendly airspace during Operation Epic Fury, the US campaign targeting Iran. 2 aircraft were involved in the incident, though only one went down while the second aircraft landed safely. The US military says the crash was not caused by hostile or friendly fire, and rescue operations are currently underway. It remains unclear whether there are casualties, but officials say at least 5 crew members were on board. Military analysts say the incident may have occurred during an aerial refueling operation, a complex maneuver that requires aircraft to fly only a few feet apart while fuel is transferred. The KC-135 plays a crucial role in combat missions, allowing fighter jets to remain airborne for extended periods. Meanwhile, missile interceptions lit up the night sky over Israel early Friday, as objects believed to be Iranian missiles were seen falling over Israeli territory. The conflict involving Iran, Israel and the United States has now entered its second week, leaving more than 2,000 people dead and disrupting the lives of millions across the region. The death toll continues to rise, with most casualties reported in Iran, while nearly 700 people have been killed in Lebanon as Israeli strikes target Hezbollah positions, forcing hundreds of thousands of residents to flee their homes.
US President Donald Trump said in a post on Truth Social that the United States is totally destroying what he called Iran's terrorist regime. Trump claimed Iran's military capabilities, including its Navy, Air Force, missiles and drones, were being decimated, adding that the country's leaders had been wiped from the face of the earth. The Israel-US war on Iran is nearly 2 weeks old, and the warring parties have intensified exchange of attacks and threats, with Iranian side strongly warning that it would retaliate any attacks on its energy infrastructure. Artura Shueliliu has more from Tehran.
Reporting from the nationwide Al-Quds Day rallies in Tehran, which have been held since 1979 Islamic Revolution, to mark the last Friday of fasting month of Ramadan. As the US-Israel war against Iran is approaching its 3rd week, the conflicting parties have increased not only exchange of tit-for-tat attacks, but verbal threats as well.
Today is Quds Day in Iran. Despite what are described as brutal attacks by Israel and the United States, millions of people have taken to the streets, not only in Tehran, but across cities nationwide. The turnout reflects the Iranian people's firm resolve to support the Islamic Republic, the cause of Quds and Palestine, and the ideals that have brought the country to this point. The message is that this path will continue with strength, and that Iran's enemies will eventually be forced to recognize the power of its people.
Iranian military and security officials issued stern warnings after US President Donald Trump's statement on likely strikes on the Islamic Republic's energy infrastructure. A spokesman for Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, Ebrahim Zulfaqari, warned that any small attack on Iran's energy facilities or ports would trigger a sweeping retaliatory response targeting oil and gas infrastructure across the region. In a statement read on state TV, he said, should such an aggression occur, all oil and gas infrastructure in the region linked to the US and its Western allies will be set ablaze. Also, Secretary of Supreme National Security Council Ali Larijani warned that the entire region could face a blackout within 30 minutes if Iran's power grid is attacked. In a strong reaction to Trump's threat of destroying Iran's power grid in 1 hour, Larijani wrote in an Arabic post on X, the entire region would be blacked out within half an hour. Meantime, Foreign Minister spokesman Ismail Baghai said on Thursday that US might resort to false flag attacks on its soil using copied Iranian drones after unconfirmed reports alleging that Iran wants to target California in retaliatory UAV strikes. Turaj Shiralilu reporting from Tehran for A News.
US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth claims Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is wounded and likely disfigured, suggesting the country's leadership is in disarray as tensions with Iran continue to escalate.
We know the new so-called not-so-supreme leader is wounded and likely disfigured. He put out a statement yesterday, a weak one, actually, but there was no voice and there was no video. It was a written statement. He called for unity. Apparently killing tens of thousands of protesters is his kind of unity. Iran has plenty of cameras and plenty of voice recorders. Why a written statement? I think you know why. His father, dead. He's scared, he's injured, he's on the run, and he lacks legitimacy. It's a mess for them. Who's in charge? Iran may not even know. With every passing hour, we know, and we know they know, that the military capabilities of their evil regime are crumbling. They can barely communicate, let alone coordinate. They're confused, and we know it. Our response? We will keep pressing. We will keep pushing, keep advancing. No quarter, no mercy for our.
As the US-Israel war with Iran enters its third week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the Middle East is no longer the same. This comes as he also vows that the Iran-backed Hezbollah group in Lebanon will pay for its aggression. Our correspondent has more from Israel.
Prime Minister says Israel is crushing the Iranian regime as well as its proxy Hezbollah in his first press conference since the war with Iran began 30 days ago. He stated that Iran was no longer the same after nearly 2 weeks of USA-Israeli attacks. We eliminate Khamenei, Netanyahu said, and he scoffs that Khamenei's son and successor, Mojtaba Khamenei, who he called a puppet of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, cannot show his face in public. Netanyahu also said Hezbollah is feeling its force, and he warned they will pay a very heavy price for its aggression. The situation in northern Israel is very complicated. Hezbollah is sending drones and missiles several times every day. We are in the border with Lebanon. 15 people were injured in the latest attack this morning over cities of Galilee. The defense minister has been very clear. If the Lebanese government does not control Hezbollah, the IDF will carry out a ground incursion to do themselves, and thus guarantee the security of the residents along the border. Last night, there was an important meeting to assess the situation, and rumors suggest that this could happen in less than a week.
Washington has issued a temporary waiver allowing countries to buy Russian oil already stranded at sea as global energy markets remain under pressure from the conflict with Iran.
Oil prices eased in Asia after Washington issued a temporary waiver allowing countries to purchase Russian oil already stranded at sea. US officials say the measure is meant to stabilize global energy markets after the conflict with Iran disrupted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz and pushed oil prices above $100 a barrel. The 30-day license allows the delivery and sale of Russian crude loaded on vessels as of March 12th and remains valid until April 11th. Russian presidential envoy Kirill Dmitriev said the waiver could affect around 100 million barrels of Russian crude currently at sea. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the recent rise in oil prices was a short-term disruption and argued it would ultimately bring long-term economic benefits for the United States. The move may boost oil supply but could put Washington at odds with its allies over sanctions on Russia. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said after a call with G7 leaders that now was not the time to relax sanctions against Russia despite the energy crisis. The United States has also announced a release of 172 million barrels from its Strategic Petroleum Reserve as part of a broader International Energy Agency coordinated release of 400 million barrels. The agency says the conflict in the Middle East is already creating the biggest oil supply disruption in history.
European Council President Antonio Costa has invited leaders of the 27 EU member states to a summit on the 19th and 20th of March in Brussels to address pressing global and regional challenges. The agenda includes the Middle East crisis, covering Iran, Lebanon, Gaza and the West Bank, and its economic and energy impacts on Europe. Leaders are also expected to review EU defence readiness, migration policy and the 2028-2034 long-term budget. Costa emphasised the need for coordinated action to protect citizens and companies while promoting de-escalation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris to discuss European support for Ukraine, increasing pressure on Russia and future security guarantees and peace negotiations. Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Paris on Friday to meet Emmanuel Macron, seeking reassurance of support from one of Kyiv's key Western allies as the war in the Middle East diverts attention from Ukraine's fight against Russia. The widening conflict has raised concerns about the supply of weapons to Ukraine, particularly air defence systems, as Gulf states use their own stocks to counter attacks from Iran. Zelensky warned Ukraine's shortage of air defence missiles could worsen. UN Nuclear Agency Chief Rafael Grossi came to Moscow for talks on the safety of Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is controlled by Russian forces. Grossi met Rosatom chief Alexei Likachev on Friday to discuss security at the facility and wider nuclear non-proliferation issues. Likachev warned that military risks around the plant are increasing, citing more artillery strikes, drone attacks and mortar fire near the site. He said the industrial area around the facility has been repeatedly targeted, sometimes causing power cuts. The European Union is preparing to loosen enforcement of some gas import rules as it tries to protect energy supplies during a period of global market uncertainty. Diplomats say the move could benefit gas deliveries from Azerbaijan.
The European Commission plans to issue guidance before March 18th, asking EU governments to apply certain gas import rules more flexibly. Officials say the aim is to ensure regulations designed to phase out Russian gas do not unintentionally disrupt supplies entering the bloc. Under current rules, shipments of pipeline gas or liquefied natural gas from certain non-Russian countries require prior authorization. Companies must provide EU customs authorities with proof of the gas's origin 5 days before it arrives. Diplomats say easing enforcement could help secure deliveries, including gas from Azerbaijan, which accounted for about 4% of EU imports last year. Azerbaijani gas reaches Europe through the Southern Gas Corridor via Turkey, with Italy and Greece among the countries importing those supplies. The flexibility could also help the EU obtain liquefied natural gas from additional suppliers if disruptions in global markets make it harder to secure cargoes from existing partners. Officials say the guidance will not change the bloc's broader plan to phase out Russian gas while industry groups warn rigid authorization procedures could delay shipments or send LNG cargoes to other markets.
After the break, we turn to the latest developments in the war involving Iran as the conflict continues to expand across multiple fronts and global concerns grow over energy security and regional stability. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. The conflict involving Iran, Israel and the United States continues to escalate, with new military strikes reported across the region and growing concerns about the wider geopolitical and economic consequences. Iranian missile and drone attacks have targeted Israel and several Gulf states, while Israeli and US forces have intensified airstrikes on Iranian military infrastructure. At the same time, tensions around the Strait of Hormuz, a key global energy route, are raising fears of disruption to international oil supplies. Let's bring in our guest now. Daniela Mello, a political scientist, joins us from Boston, USA. Daniela, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we're seeing the conflict spread beyond Iran and Israel, with Hezbollah attacks from Lebanon and Israeli strikes there in response. Does this indicate the emergence of a second major front, and what does this tell us about the current trajectory of the war?
Well, what it does tell us is that it is clearly a strategy of the Iranian regime to cause possible to certainly to Israel, so that it can increase the costs of the war quickly enough for it to have an effect on, say, the U.S. president's willingness to continue to participate in this conflict. So it seems clear that one of the strategies of Iran is, in fact, to involve as many actors as possible, so that it can have all sorts of effects, primarily an effect in the world global economy. Right now, the number one geostrategic weapon at the hands of the Iranian regime is how it affects the oil industry, the global energy economy, and using it to its maximum ability. The attacks on that through the attacks, of course, on the Strait of Hormuz affected the impact. Certainly, I think most of us would agree they're in an asymmetric conflict when it comes to military capability, but they have other strengths, and they're trying to use those strengths, that is, the impact on the global economy, as a pressure point for the Americans, for the Israelis, and obviously for everybody else. They're using it to maximum effect. So I do think that this tells us that the trajectory of the war is not going to slow down in terms of the strategies right now. I mean, just this morning I was listening to Secretary of War Pete Hegseth basically say that the United States is about to launch its most aggressive day of bombing and targeting of the Iranians. We should expect, if the past is prelude to the future, that the Iranians are going to react exactly the same way that they have reacted, and that the cities around the region, Dubai, and the places that have been hit repeatedly and targeted repeatedly, will probably see an increase in that targeting today and throughout the weekend, as the United States maintain their strategy of maximum pressure.
Okay. I want to look at another front of the escalation. The United Nations has warned that the humanitarian impact of the conflict is growing rapidly, with civilian casualties rising and damage to critical infrastructure across the region. How serious is the humanitarian situation becoming, and could it begin to influence international pressure for a ceasefire?
Yes and yes, meaning that, yes, the humanitarian crisis has already started. We have major displacements of people inside Iran, but also in Lebanon, and obviously we have populations that are being affected throughout the region. As the war continues, as the conflict continues, the Europeans are particularly concerned about the humanitarian crisis, along with institutions like the United Nations, of course. But I mentioned the Europeans because the Europeans learned a lesson over the past 20 years or so, that every time that there's a major disruption to this part of the world, those waves of refugees eventually arrive at the doors of the European Union. So they are deeply concerned with a potential refugee crisis. They're obviously also concerned about access to food, access to clean water for the populations that are being displaced. And they're obviously concerned about the fatalities among the civilian fatalities in particular that this conflict is bringing about. The number keeps increasing exponentially from day to day as the strikes continue and as the conflict continues to destabilize the entire area. So we know that war causes these types of crises. It's not a big bet that this will be at the top of the list of priorities and of concerns for the Europeans. And they too, of course, will use whatever power they have to try to influence the United States and Israel to do so. Having said so, we know that with this administration, that's not exactly the type of pressure that is likely to yield the fastest results. To be perfectly frank, internal pressures within the United States would probably be more effective at shifting the direction of the US administration than any type of pressure coming either through the United Nations or through the Europeans, who have been rebuffed many times from any critical conversations that the United States has engaged in.
And Daniela, President Trump has previously suggested that weakening Iran's leadership could lead to regime change, but intelligence assessments and regional analysts say the country's political system appears resilient, even under military pressure. Does regime change in Iran still look like a realistic objective?
We get contradictory messages coming from the US administration. The president himself has been the one most frequently to mention the possibility of regime change, and mentioning also that that Donald Trump should have a say in who the next leadership of Iran is. So the president seems to have an eye towards what comes next, but the clear strategy has not been defined in any way. And again, to mention the Pentagon briefings, when we hear Pete Hegseth, he doesn't talk about regime change. He talks about military objectives and the president determining when those military objectives have been accomplished, and the president dictating when the war ends in many ways. So we know that so far, but that doesn't tell us much as the public and it doesn't inform us in terms of what to expect next. It seems that plans are shifting when it comes to what comes next. The president went into this war 2 weeks ago mentioning the Venezuelan model over and over again. So I think we can hypothesize that the president was hoping for a situation in which either we would have leadership rise up within Iran that would be pragmatic and willing to work with the Americans, and that an alternative version of this Venezuelan model would work with Iran. However, that ship seems to have sailed, and the Iranian regime, as you mentioned quite well, is not the same as the Venezuelan regime. It's a very well established, consolidated regime with strong institutions, with many layers of leadership, and many contingency plans built over nearly 5 decades of waiting for a conflict like this. So the regime doesn't have many incentives to collaborate with the Americans at all. In fact, I would say that the main incentive of the regime, especially of the groups that hold key power within the regime, like the Revolutionary Guard, is to survive. For them, survival of the regime will be a victory in this war, and that seems to be where they're throwing their bets. The Americans seem to be scrambling for a plan B for what actually comes next, or if they're going to be involved at all in what comes next, because none of those things seems to be clear, especially as the American president claims that he doesn't necessarily want boots on the ground, but he might put boots on the ground. It seems very, again, we get a number of messages and no certainty in terms of what the direction for the day after is.
Daniela, that's all we have time for on the program. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your analysis today.
Thank you.
Now we'll take a break. When we return, we'll look at major stories from the region. Stay with us. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Authorities in Turkey say sirens were heard overnight at the Incirlik air base in the country's south, prompting speculation on social media about a possible missile incident. The episode comes amid heightened regional tensions following recent missile interceptions over Turkish airspace. The Turkish Defence Ministry confirmed in a statement that NATO defences intercepted the third missile from Iran and asked Tehran to clarify. Here are the details.
Sirens were heard early Friday morning at Turkey's Incirlik Air Base in the southern province of Adana, according to reports by Turkish state media. The base hosts Turkish forces, along with a contingent of American military personnel. Shortly after the sirens were reported, videos began circulating on social media that appeared to show a missile being shot down over Adana. However, local media has since described the footage as fake, saying there has been no confirmed missile activity in the area. The reports come at a time of heightened security concerns in Turkey. Earlier this week, NATO air defense systems intercepted a second ballistic missile that entered Turkish airspace within the span of several days. Following the latest interception, Turkey's defense ministry announced the deployment of a Patriot air defense system in the southern Malatya province as part of NATO's integrated air defense network. Iran, for its part, has denied responsibility for any missile launches toward Turkey, a core NATO member. In a statement released Thursday, the Turkish Defense Ministry emphasized that Incirlik is a Turkish-owned and operated military installation. It stressed that the base belongs to the Republic of Turkey and hosts Turkish F-16 fighter jets, tanker aircraft, and unmanned aerial vehicles. The ministry added that the presence of American troops at Incirlik does not mean it is an American military installation or base. Spanish, Polish, and Qatari military personnel are also stationed there as part of Allied deployments, the ministry said. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Greece has evacuated its embassy staff from Iran through the Astara border into Azerbaijan amid rising security concerns. For more on this, here's Rukaya Bashamak reporting from Astara.
As of the latest updates, around 7 staff members of the Greek embassy in Iran and a dozen other nationals were also evacuated on Thursday through the Astara border checkpoint. Several people are still crossing as evacuation operations continue. For now, it has been more than 2 weeks since the evacuation process started, with more than 2,000 foreign nationals having passed through till now. Still, the largest number of travelers passing through this point so far comes from China, followed by Russia and then Tajikistan, while the rest come from a range of other countries across Asia, Europe, and beyond. Azerbaijani authorities say they continue to facilitate the humanitarian transit of foreign nationals, providing them with logistical support and coordination at the border as evacuation efforts move forward. Reporting from Astara, this is Rukaya Bashamak from A News.
Protests have erupted outside the government building in Yerevan ahead of a court hearing that could decide whether the arrest of Armenian businessman Samvel Karapetyan is extended. Karapetyan was detained in June last year after making public calls for a coup attempt. A court later ordered that he remain under house arrest. Despite the restrictions, the newly formed Strong Armenia Party has nominated him as its candidate for Prime Minister in the upcoming elections. International leaders and experts are continuing discussions in Azerbaijan's capital, focusing on climate diplomacy, trade links across Eurasia, and China's role in global governance. Our Aytan Shukurova has more.
The second day of the 13th Global Baku Forum continues in Baku with a series of high-level discussions examining global governance, climate diplomacy, regional connectivity and sustainable development. One of the morning sessions focused on China and global governance initiatives, bringing together former European leaders, diplomats and economic experts. Discussions centered on China's growing role in shaping global governance frameworks and its impact on international economic and political cooperation.
Our world is challenging since the Second World War. What we are living is scary, and we are here to say loudly that let's come back to diplomacy, dialogue, human rights, rule of law, and this is what matters to maintain human dignity.
Later in the morning, the forum turned to climate diplomacy with a panel titled Beyond Negotiations, the Battle to Keep COP Alive. The discussion brought together leaders of several UN climate conferences, including COP29 President Muhtar Babayev and COP31 President-designate Murat Kurum, Turkey's Minister of Environment.
And I think the COP31 in Turkey will take place in very complicated time. And all of us now, we very motivated to and mobilized to actively support Turkey team to perform this big mission. You know, Turkey and Australia, they organized a tandem and to move this climate agenda this year. But Turkey, as a host country, as a co-president, the big responsibility in this frame, and Azerbaijani team, from the lead negotiator point of view, a high-level climate champion, youth climate champion, organizational issues, all of us very mobilized to assist them to perform these very important events this year. And Murat Kurum, Minister Murat Kurum already today represent his preliminary vision for climate discussions.
The situation we are experiencing today, the crisis we are facing, is largely caused by energy issues. At the same time, around 70% of the problem that climate change is trying to address is energy-related. When you consider that 70% of our emissions come from energy, it becomes clear that every country needs to implement an energy policy that can sustain itself. In this regard, of course, each country has its own characteristics, but we attach great importance to renewable energy. We will take steps related to renewable energy.
Participants addressed the future of international climate negotiations and ways to strengthen international cooperation on sustainable development. Another key discussion focused on the Middle Corridor and Eurasian connectivity, examining transport and trade routes linking Asia and Europe. During the afternoon sessions, participants also examined Africa's development outlook with speakers including former European Council President Charles Michel and former Maltese Prime Minister Joseph Muscat.
This meeting should be, like others, an opportunity to address our problem, not looking back, colonization, racism, slavery, but to look back, modern economy, modern services and organization. So this meeting is a good, excellent opportunity.
The day will conclude with discussions on accelerating the United Nations 2030 agenda, focusing on inclusive economic growth. Aytan Shukurova, Natik Mehmedov, İlkin Mehdiyev, A-News.
The conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan is worsening, with both sides trading fresh accusations after overnight attacks marked a major escalation.
Taliban authorities accuse Pakistan of carrying out overnight airstrikes that hit civilian homes in Kabul and a fuel depot near Kandahar airport. Officials say at least 6 people were killed, including women and children, in what they describe as a major escalation in the worst fighting between the two neighbors in years.
All the children were asleep at night. I was awake. Around 12 a.m., we heard the sound of an airplane, and 3 to 4 seconds later, the whole house went dark. Everywhere was filled with smoke, and all the windows and glass were shattered. The children were sitting in their room and blood was flowing from their heads and faces. I quickly took them out of the house into the yard because the house was damaged and it was dangerous. About half an hour later, I realized that I was injured too.
Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid said the strike near Kandahar airport hit a fuel depot belonging to private airline Kam Air and warned the attacks would not go unanswered. Pakistan, however, said its military carried out successful airstrikes on 4 alleged militant hideouts in Kabul, Kandahar and Paktia province. Afghanistan's defense ministry said it later responded with drone strikes on a Pakistani military base in the northern city of Kohat, claiming heavy damage.
Uzbekistan is moving ahead with its first nuclear plant, with French company Framatome possibly joining, as it seeks to diversify energy amid rising demand. Our correspondent in Tashkent brings us more.
Uzbekistan is strengthening international partnerships as it moves forward with its first nuclear power project. During talks with the French nuclear engineering company Framatome, Uzbekistan's Atomic Energy Agency Usatom discussed cooperation on advanced automated control systems and technology for future nuclear facilities. Framatome is expected to contribute technological expertise, including instrumentation and control systems that monitor reactor performance and ensure safety. The systems are widely used at nuclear facilities around the world and are considered essential for the reliable operation of nuclear power plants. The plant nuclear complex in Uzbekistan will include 2 large VVER-1000 type reactors and 2 small modular reactors, with total generating capacity expected to exceed 2.1 gigawatts. Construction of a smaller modular nuclear plant has already begun in Jizakh, where 6 reactors of 55 megawatt each are planned, producing around 330 megawatts of electricity, with the first unit expected to begin operation around 2029. Nuclear energy is becoming an increasingly important topic across Central Asia. Kazakhstan, the region's largest uranium producer, also plans to build its first nuclear power plant, after a 2024 national referendum supported by about 73% of voters. The government is currently selecting technology partners. Possible suppliers include France, South Korea, China and Russia. Experts say this project reflects a regional shift toward nuclear energy as the country seeks stable power supplies to support economic growth and reduce carbon emissions. It is Sivir Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A-News.
Kazakhstan is seeing a steady rise in investment activity, with billions of dollars flowing into the economy over the past year. Officials say both domestic and foreign investment are increasing, supported by new economic policies and industrial projects. Our correspondent reports from Almaty.
Kazakhstan is seeing a noticeable increase in investment activity. Total investment in the country's economy reached about $46 billion last year, roughly 13% more than the year before. The strongest growth has been seen in the financial and insurance sectors. Foreign capital is also contributing to this momentum. In the first 9 months of last year, Kazakhstan attracted nearly $15 billion in foreign direct investment, an increase of about 11% compared with the same period a year earlier. The government says improving the investment climate remains a priority. A new investment policy concept has been introduced, setting the strategy through 2030. The focus is on attracting funding into competitive industries with higher added value and expanding sectors beyond natural resources. Kazakhstan is also continuing to use a 3-level system to attract investors, working with partners internationally at the national level and across the regions. And according to the Eurasian Development Bank, Kazakhstan is now among the leaders in the Eurasian Economic Union when it comes to attracting foreign direct investment. The country accounted for nearly $1 billion in additional inflows, more than a third of the overall increase across the region. Analysts say much of this momentum is linked to new industrial projects, which are helping Kazakhstan strengthen its position as one of the region's emerging investment hubs. Fariza Kalimursina, Almaty, A News.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.